Exactly. All right. So I'm going to introduce you right now. I am here with a fascinating individual. I've been wanting to get you on for some time. I just got around to it. Now, I know you as Cringewalker, but you
Yes.
go by a different name now. And I want you to say it because I'm just going to butcher it. Now, how would you pronounce this?
Well, there are variations of it because I changed it multiple times, but the current iteration is Aelthemplaer or Aelthemplaer. It comes from the Greek word leth, which means foolishness, and so like anti-foolishness, which was the Greek word for basically truth. And then Templar is just like an old English way of saying a Templar knight. So I have a thing for Templars. I respect their history,
Yeah,
even though it's
and
not
if I could
mine.
give people a little bit of introduction, this is, if people want to find more from you, I'm just going to say it right off the jump. Go to luthnite.substack.com. That's Luth as in Lutheran, Knight as in
Yeah.
the guy with the
No,
sword.
no longer Lutheran, but I'll probably change the name of the blog soon. But
See, this is why I got to stay on this guy because he's going to be a new type of guy soon. And I just wanted to give people a brief introduction because I liked what you had on your Substack to add a little bit of color. Um, just from the Substack says why subscribe. It says, do you hate rank punditry? Are you a conservative tired of Trumpism? Are you a liberal desperate to untie the shackles of progressive thought? Does centrism sound too passive? I write for you. And you got one part here at the end I liked. Anti-American Christianity. Have you ever considered the reality that America is where Europe dumped all its heretics? Why would you look for truth in the land of heresy? Are you tired of American evangelicalism? Damn, I fucked that up. But are smart enough not to be a cringe atheist? I hope you'll learn some new shades of Christianity here. And so I was going to ask you, you might not be a Lutheran. Are you another shade of Christian then?
no, I tried Lutheranism for like 5 years, and it just kept getting more and more depressing. So I was raised Catholic. I have like I'm very mixed. I have on my mother's side a Jewish line, and that converted to Eastern Catholicism. So I have a little soft spot for Orthodoxy because the Eastern Catholics used to be Orthodox, then they became Catholics, and now they're Eastern Catholics that kind of are halfway in between but loyal to the Pope. And then my dad's side is just Irish and Catholic, so that's normal. But like my primary upbringing is Catholic, and so I went back to that when I realized that uh, Protestants kind of are in the shitter. It's not getting better.
Yeah,
And it's
going to be
depressing.
speaking. I'll be speaking to Ryan Turnipseed in the next week or so, and he's going to be discussing his time from the bowels of
The
the
pro-
Lutheran Church.
the prophet of lament.
Yeah,
um,
he's going in there swinging.
if you go digging, you'll see before it was Cringewalker, my one of my many handles was harboring on a lament, and that was when I first started complaining about the Lutheran Church before I left it. I went to Lutheran Church in like the somewhere in the 2015s. And I went there for like a few months, and then like name wise, I kept calling myself Lutheran, but I was like increasingly, nope, no, I'm not, definitely not. No, okay, I'm out. Um,
Well,
and
if you don't mind me asking, what was it that caused you to find an interest in the Lutheran Church to begin with?
I read a lot of history, as you can tell by my Substack, and I just really resonated with Luther's writings. I'll say I actually resonate with his writings while he was Catholic more than when he became Lutheran, which probably was a warning sign I should have noticed. There are laments that Luther writes about when he first visited Rome as a monk. People have this like fiction that Luther was a humble village monk. No, he was high up the chain. He was the vicar of Saxony and another state. So he was like governing huge sections of the Holy Roman Empire's church. He was a full on administrator. He was not some lowly nobody. He was probably in line to become a bishop in a few years, to be honest. And in his life as a vicar of the Catholic Church, he had many lamentations. There's a record of when he was having a private battle with a monastery, because the monastery was run by a hippie, and the hippie wouldn't allow veterans to join the monastery. He was very anti. He was anti-war, anti-murder. So this abbot father viewed all soldiers as murderers and unwelcome at his abbot. And Luther had to argue with this man, debate him about how, like, you can't deny someone who feels lament and regret for his sins, and wants to go to an abbey to essentially, like the medieval equivalent of going through the PTSD process and healing, right?
Yeah.
And so Luther has these he had these passionate arguments with local abbots to try and resolve these issues. And so for a few years, he was like the arbitrator of a lot of problems in different abbots. But there is a few moments where he when he went to Rome, and I think it was might have been 1507 or 1515, I can't remember. But he went to Rome, and he had this like spiritual breaking moment where he witnessed a lot of sodomy and pedophilia with the priesthood in Rome, and it really broke him. Like it broke his. He never had gone to Rome. He didn't know how bad the higher ups were. He was a higher up in the Holy Roman Empire, but he hadn't gone to Rome. Like Rome was like a cesspool at this point. And so he writes about this like the spiritual death he experienced in Rome, witnessing the degree of pedophilia. He writes that the Pope was going to issue an order that the bishops must give up like a third of their young boys, but he realized that if he issued the edict, it would reveal that the bishops have young boys. And so the Pope withdrew the order because he didn't want the public knowing the amount of pedophilia in the bishops.
A historical account of saying the quiet part out loud, it sounds like.
Yes. And so Luther records like the deep depression he fell into, like of witnessing the clown show of Rome. And I really resonated with I really resonated with his writing as a depressed Catholic, which I most relate to now coming back to the Catholic Church.
I do wonder, and I've never actually asked another Catholic. I'm a Catholic myself, and so I rarely get to ask this sort of laterally. But it sounds like, and you know more about him obviously than I do. I was not aware that the issues of hierarchical pedophilia reach back that far, and I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Maybe that can lead into some of our other topics. But what are your thoughts on the prevalence of that? And what do you think the cause? I had a theory about what the cause is, but I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
The earliest instance of the problem dates back to I think the 4th century. It is a long-standing problem. There was a pope that got in trouble for it. There have been a few popes in history that have been condemned to hit hell by the next pope because of the degree of sin that they were under. Like Pope Alexander, the Borgia Pope, he was condemned by his successor to hell. There's a famous quote by, I think it's 2 popes after him. This old man pope who was originally going to become pope, but Borgia bought the papacy, and so he had this like lifelong bitterness to this guy because he lost out on being a young pope. And so when he finally did become the pope after the Borgia had died, he wrote this someone gets to the top and they can finally let out their like pent up anger, and if you don't mind, it is related to the pedophilia thing, but I'll just read out his short paragraph of I'm the Pope and I can say whatever I want. Well, sit on, fella, because I got some things to vent.
Yeah, please go.
What is it? It was 2 popes after him. It was Julius II, and Julius II, by the way, he was a badass pope. He was he would wear he was one of the first popes after the problems Luther was describing. Who actually tried to fix shit, actually fix it. And so he wrote this paragraph. Sorry for distracting. It's somewhere in this.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so the famous quote that Julius II wrote about the Borgia Pope: "I will not live in the same rooms as the Borgia did. He desecrated the Holy Church as none before. He usurped the papal power by the devil's aid, and I forbid under pain of excommunication anyone to speak or think of Borgia again. His name and memory must be forgotten. It must be crossed out of every document and memorial. His reign must be obliterated. All paintings made of the Borgia or of them must be covered up with black coat, and all the tombs of the Borgia must be opened up and their bodies sent back to where they belong, Spain." It's whoa, buddy, you didn't have to let it all out at once.
That's I want to recycle that for my own purposes. Back to where they belong, Spain.
Yeah, It's one of it's one of the like most like brutal takedowns. Like this was a pope who basically said that guy before me, yeah, he's in hell. He's an antichrist. Don't even mention him.
Yeah.
Um so anyway, there's a lot of history of this. Like once the issue becomes public facing, as is the case with many institutions, they finally deal with the problem once it becomes a public nuisance. And Luther was a public nuisance, and so the Catholic Church finally took, officially Luther was excommunicated. Unofficially, they took his like criticisms, sorted out the heresy from the truth, and made some reforms. There's a Actually, you might find this interesting. You know the guy who was selling indulgences that caused the 95 theses to be nailed? Tetzel, the guy who was selling, he was selling indulgences, and Luther got pissed off and wrote his 95 theses because of him.
Yeah.
Tetzel, Tetzel was also excommunicated. They took Luther's advice, agreed, and excommunicated him too. So it was like an issue with the Catholic Church was like, okay, you're both kind of going nuts. Luther, you're a heretic, you're out. Tetzel, what the hell are you doing selling like these indulgences that even the Virgin Mary could sell? You were supposed to say the Virgin Mary is not without any sin. So Tetzel was excommunicated. Fun little story actually. Tetzel and Luther, Luther got out. Like, he became a heretic, was kicked out, but the lords in the Holy Roman Empire protected him from arrest. Tetzel was arrested, sentenced to the dungeon, and basically spent a decade of the last years of his life in a dungeon. The man who caused Luther to become a Protestant rotted in a dungeon, which is kind of ironic. There's a letter that Luther wrote to Tetzel, offering amends for their disagreement. And apparently, before Tetzel died, they had forgiven each other for the mess they had caused in the church. And they basically parted ways as friends, which is kind of beautiful. It's actually a beautiful story of reconciliation.
Just like Dr. Dre and Eazy-E.
Yeah. Like I wish, I honestly wish there had been a pope that the popes that time were very, they were aware that the Catholic Church had some deep problems, and they were kind of like of a warrior caste thereon. Like Julian II was literally like a military general, so he was a pope and a general, and these aren't men that are very willing to forgive, unfortunately. But I feel like if at least one pope had been at least like willing to make amends, that the schism would have been avoided. Ultimately, Luther was very likely suffering from bipolar disorder, based off, like, if you read his letters, he has a bipolar. There's like a curve of behavior for bipolars where they'll go like basically like 6 weeks of hyper productivity and 6 weeks of like suicidal depression, and that will just flip back and forth. That's why it's called bipolar. If you track out Luther's letters between when he's ecstatic and writing and when he's like suicidally depressed, there's a bit of a kind of a fixed biochemical signature there that makes you think, yeah, this guy's bipolar. Like he's on this like fixed schedule. Like it's funny. Bipolar men basically have their own version of like a menstrual cycle with the mind, where they'll like have like 6 weeks of suicidal depression, 6 weeks of insane creativity. And then they'll just like kind of like bounce between that for their entire lives. It's a bit of like a double-edged sword. Luther's letters kind of seem like, from what I've seen, at least, I might be wrong, but from what I've seen, they seem synchronized to that cycle.
That's interesting. Is that sort of a popular theory, or is that just something you've gleaned from the reading?
I'm yeah, it's just something I get from reading. Like, this is a
well, it's not like it's a crazy theory either. Like, of course, there were people throughout time who were probably like that, and probably very interesting, novel minds that can come up with anything that makes you think outside of the norm, right?
Yeah, and ultimately, like, if you take Luther's claims about the Catholic Church to their extreme, they kind of end up proving the Catholic Church is true. Because, I mean, okay, if the Pope is the office of the Antichrist, why would the devil set up the office in the false church, right? He would set that up in the true church, right? So, like if the Pope is the office of the Antichrist, then that means the Catholic Church is true. It just has a bad head. I mean, like the Pope, the devil wouldn't go to like the Alexandrian bishop of Orthodoxy and be like, oh, you're my office of Antichrist now. No, he'd go to the true church and set up the Antichrist in the proper body. But as I said, some popes have admitted that last pope was an Antichrist. He was sitting in the seat and he was an Antichrist. So I'm perfectly okay with agreeing with I am perfectly okay with agreeing with the popes who agree with Luther. that there are occasionally an antichrist sitting on the papal seal. That doesn't mean every pope is an antichrist. That doesn't mean every pope is wrong. That means occasionally the devil gets the seat, and you have to, expel that, or you have to, or like David, when Saul the Antichrist was on the throne of Israel, you have to pray for him and wait for him to die. That submission is really important. I've come to like, I've wrestled with a lot, and I really do think like true religion is this combination of patience, submission, and praying for the opportune moment to restore order, to correct teaching. You don't go and start your own church. You do as David did. You pray for the enemy to be removed, to be proven and exposed and expelled. And that's what David did. And as far as I'm concerned, coming back to Catholicism is a fulfillment of what David did. David wouldn't have gotten, like, if David was David literally was like kind of excommunicated, and he just patiently prayed for the king of Israel, and eventually he was the king of Israel. So, like,
See, I love this stuff, but I do know that we've got a pretty diverse audience here at Blood Satellite, and I could just hear the distant cries of cursed papist nonsense.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get back to Eunuchracy.
Yeah, no, but I was hoping this would kind of lead into that as well, because there's a few topics that you had spoken at length about on your Substack, and I would encourage people to look into it. And I guess it's up to you which one we start with, because there's Eunuchracy, and maybe that leads into sort of the siege economy stuff. But I really wanted to kind of let you kind of guide the way on that, if you're willing.
Yeah. So I mean, Eunuchracy is essentially it ends in the siege. If you haven't gotten to the end of it, it talks into the siege economy. But I'll start. Like, Eunuchracy, I made this article, Global American Eunuchracy, is a bit of a play on the global American empire that's been going around. And I feel like Eunuchracy is a better word than empire. We don't, the American apparatus is not an empire. It may have imperial adventures, but it's not a proper empire, right? Like an empire, it has like in some senses, my friend Paul Fahrenheit says, like, the global American empire is neither global American nor an empire, like the Holy Roman Empire. It's not global because it basically only has a small circle of supporters. It's not an empire because it's more of an extraction industry, and it's not American because the leaders of it are like these like globalists. They're not properly American. And so
let me just say, I agree with that. I think a lot of people that I listen to from various sectors of this thing of ours, this distant right, but even on the left, who are grappling with that problem. They have different names for it and different ways to describe this phenomena of it. They call it an empire, but they kind of know it's not, but they don't know how to approach the problem then. Sorry, you can continue.
Yeah, so I came across the term Eunuchracy. I forget exactly where. I remember reading it in a blog about the Ming Empire several years ago. And then recently, when I was on a lunch break, I came across that blog again, and I reread that word. And I was like, this is actually a really interesting word. And because, like, when I read it originally years ago, I was like, oh, that's a clever word. And that was it. And then a lot of times when I see a clever word, I get kind of like autistic about it and go on a deep dive of where does this word come from, who invented it, why does it exist, and what is its proper definition in history. So I started hunting down the term Eunuchracy, and I found out that if you go to Google Book, like my standard approach to finding the origin of a term is first go to Google Books, then go to the New York Public Library, and then go. And I'm a graduate of Columbia University, so I still have academic credentials to access the archives there. And so my third source is to go to the Columbia Library and go dig in there.
Cool.
I'm a scholar. And even though I didn't finish my PhD, I still have a master's, and I'm more than happy to use it.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, just to give people some background, reveal as much as you're comfortable with, what would your academic background be? Because some people are quite impressed by this stuff.
It is in architecture, but there's a bit of other stuff in there. The universities I went to don't really believe in the concept of a major. They'll issue a major, but they'll force you to do other stuff. So I got a polytechnic education, as they call it. I like it, yeah, because it, like, when I was a sophomore and a junior in my undergrad, I was learning genetic engineering alongside architecture, which is really fun. So anyway, I got my degrees in architecture, all of them, but I have you could say I have an unofficial minor in several topics because the school made you look at them, and I went deep into them.
Yeah. On this
And
show, we're very interested in sort of not exiled academics, but people who have sort of found their way outside of academia, but have tales from the inside. I find those people very
yeah,
interesting.
I quit a PhD last year because it wasn't going really. I'm with the war in Europe. I was in Europe for the PhD, and it really wasn't going anywhere with the funding. So I was like,
Oh,
okay,
wow.
I can see that this is going to be 4 years of scraping the barrel, and I would rather just go back to my old job and make proper money. So
What do you think you might ever restart that again, or are you done with that entirely? Do you think?
it really depends on how long the war lasts, if the institutions still have any worth in a few years, and if there's a possibility at some point in the next 10 years that you might be able to do a PhD without any actual university.
Hmm.
There's a bit of me that wants to hedge that bet and be like, maybe wait 8 years, and if they allow like non-academic PhDs to happen with online education, why not just do that? Screw
Well,
this
I know that
universities.
the crews that we run in are on the cutting edge of getting Chat GPT to write all your shit for you, so that might be an option. And I'm a guy like I'm in marketing, and I always have in my mind I really want to go and get an MBA. I don't, but that's like what $250,000 if you're getting a good one, and you might as well get a proper MBA. But
Yeah,
I always keep that in my mind.
I went for a master's at Columbia because it was I'm smart. I got into the accelerated program, and so it was a 3-semester master's program, really nice. And I spent that master's program in Moscow, in London, in Paris, and in Berlin, and in Dessau, and in a lot of places. It was a wonderful 18-month experience or 16-month experience, I forget. Um, and that was good enough for me. I mean, like, you can get a professor job on a master's, and that I did enough work there and experience there to not really give a shit what people think about PhD. I just look at people that like I could write a PhD in 6 months and be done, but you're not allowed to do that, right? So it's like, why would I force myself to spend 4 to 8 years somewhere knowing I could get this done in 6 months? That's I value my life. I don't. When I was in a PhD, I had a scholarship and everything. I wasn't like spending money. I was getting money out of it. I still have like a couple of $1,000s stuck in Belgium because I don't want to bring it out until after the war when the euro bounces back. but like I was getting paid to do my harebrained crazy nonsense. Um, I'm again like I am part Jewish. I do think in terms of money on a lot of things. I'm sorry. It's just my nature. Sorry. If you're not gonna
Look,
make me money, I don't give a shit.
someone's got to keep an eye on the dollary dues.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. Like I am the kind of person who has in the past made $10,000 in a day timing my shit, and I intend to continue that skill set. And I'm sorry, it's just one of the skills you get being of that tribe, and I'm going to use it and give that money to my friends because I want them to succeed.
See, as a non-Jewish, just white man, it's very difficult for me to see things not in just lumber and steel and fish.
Exactly. And our enemies call this racism. I'm sorry, but like these are just like the particular points of pride of our people. It goes beyond just white people. Like, I'm sorry, I go to Ethiopia, and the way in which they tell a story, I can't do that. They can do that because that's their unique quality, and they should love their quality. It's something you should give thanks to God for beseeching your people with these unique qualities. Anyway, though, but like, yeah, I love the idea that like, yeah, some people they can only think in terms of logs and steel. That's literally the American mindset.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Sandbach circle theory?
Okay, here's the thing. I've heard. It's hard for me to differentiate what's like a meme at this point, but I know like you talk about you're in the circle, you're out of the circle, and then you would draw a circle around like Northern
Doggerland.
Europe. Yeah, yeah.
It's the Doggerland and this theory. This is crackpot, but actually genetically provable theory by our beloved friend Mr. Sandbach, who's a wonderful Twitter account to follow. Truly a gentleman and a scholar. But if you draw like I think it's like a something like a 300-mile circumference around where Doggerland was that sunk into the water, everyone there has like a unbelievably high IQ. And just like and like only thinks in terms of like you said, wood and steel, and that's all they can think about. And like
That's interesting.
Sorry, go on.
See, this is the perfect bridge between my crazy esoteric bullshit and Sandbach thinking, because I'm like, oh, this is like your Atlantis. This is good. I like this.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry for going on that tangent. It's just a fun tangent to go down.
Hey,
I'm
look, we
currently
love tangents.
I am currently dealing with probably a dozen angry Lutheran pastors that are calling me an evil Nazi, even though I would like literally be in the concentration camp.
Well, look,
uh,
honestly, if you look at what Nazis these days, who would they put in a concentration camp? There'd be like 2/3 of white people would probably be in that concentration camp
I know.
too.
Anyway, though, I don't like going into these topics because I find them kind of cringe and annoying. But so to bring this back to global American Eunuchracy.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at the time. We just are about to hit the half an hour mark. I don't want
No,
to
no, no, no.
disrespect
It's fine.
the
It's fine. It's fine.
audience. So when I read that blog again, I found that the author that was using the blog was talking about a work by John Key, who is a British non-academic. He's like a specialist in Oriental history, which now you can't use Asian history apparently. I could go on a tangent about that. I hate the term Asian because in British it means India and China, and those are distinct civilizations, and you're disrespecting both by merging them. But anyway, so um, he wrote this long treatise on the Ming Empire and multiple dynastic cycles in China, and he used this term eunuchracy to describe what we would describe as late stage empire. A eunuchracy is when the imperial eunuchs start to manage things a bit too much, and at a certain point, as the system starts to strain under the overbearing tax burden on the population, everyone kind of starts to realize that it's going to come crashing down. And the thing about eunuchs is that they can't give what they've extracted to anyone, so they kind of have only their lives, and then that's the end. And so something happens in the mind of a eunuch in the late imperial stage where they kind of start freaking out that it's coming crashing down, and they don't want to spend the last years of their life in the ashes without their court privileges and foods and parties.
And just for the record, by eunuchs, would we be talking literal eunuchs like the
in,
transgender
in
class,
this
or
case,
just people generally who have no descendants?
you could use both, but in the Chinese case, it's literally just like people that the state made eunuchs. Now, the reason why eunuchs exist is because if you are a educated noble man in China, you are competition to the imperial throne. You and your family are potentially a dynasty in waiting. You can imagine the emperor is like the he's the guy who won the last heavenly cycle. His family, his dynasty took over. There's about like 500 other dynasties just waiting for their chance to be the next dynasty name on the list of dynasties of China. And so the emperor has this problem where any mistake he makes could be a foothold for one of those families to like push themselves in and take over. It's just a very like violent system. It's always been this way. And so one of the ways in which China found a fix for this problem is making eunuchs run some of the core imperial bureaucracy, because a eunuch doesn't have a dynasty. He's by his nature, he is not a dynastic man. He's a dead end, and so although he may come from dynasties, and in some instances where he does take over, maybe he gives it to a cousin or someone else. It's like it's not a clear dynastic line, and so he's kind of just not trusted as much, at least by the nobles. And so, as an imperial dynasty comes to its natural cyclical end, where the emperor is like kind of looking for the exit door, and the nobles are kind of looking for the entrance door, the eunuchs kind of go a little insane because they're of the belief that the next dynasty that takes over is going to kill them all and replace it with their eunuchs, right? A new dynasty comes in, kill the eunuchs, bury them with the emperor, and bring in the new eunuchs. And so they kind of go nuts. They start over extracting, they start overindulging, they start going insane. John Keyes, the book I was talking about, the guy who seems to have been one of the creators of the term eunuchracy, he has this really good quote about the eunuchs who were at this time tax collectors, and he says, the tax collectors found gold mines not in the mountains but in the rich cities. If they were told that a rich man lived there, here or there, they said he had a silver mine in his house, and immediately decided to ransack and undermine his home. Sometimes, in order to secure an exemption from being robbed, the cities and even provinces bartered with the eunuchs and paid them large sums of silver, which they said was taken from the mines of the royal treasury. The result of this unusual solicitousness was an increase in the price of all commodities, with the corresponding growth in the general spread of poverty. You might equate this with the lawfare that happens with some organizations when you dare speak against certain people groups. A rich man says something bad about a tribe, there's a gold mine. Let's go. Let's get it. So in many ways, the nature of a eunuch might be reflected. Now, John Key, I got interested in him. I tried to look up his history, and he seems to be something of a member of a clique of British scholars from the 1970s, including someone named Colin Galashan, who is this guy who seems to have just entirely disappeared from history after he wrote a few things in the 1970s. I'm still curious where the hell he went. And then a few other authors, possibly including Peter Hitchens and other people. But these were like a clique of 1970s writers who were really writing some like really good stuff that has been forgotten about in history. John Galashan wrote a series of research articles and publications on the plight of Black America and the political background that was using them to take over power through victimhood, which is kind of an interesting little key. And John Keyes was like the Oriental scholar, and then there was another guy I can't remember, but anyway, this led me to I went to the New York Public Library to look up the term Eunuchracy and see if there was an older source, and I did find Colin McGallashan used this term before John Keyes, even though they worked for the same newspaper. So I'm going to assume somehow they probably both either came up with the term or shared the term or read each other's works. And so he wrote it in the New Statesman. He wrote Colin McGallashan. He used the term Eunuchracy to describe, in a similar way, the Labour Party of the 1970s. And if you don't know what the Labour Party was like in the 1970s, the British and the British government, it was over extractive, but also very inept. He uses the term Eunuchracy to describe a different kind of thing. He describes a politician that is like stuffy. Like he seems to use the term in terms of like stuffiness and like stuck in their ways, emasculated in the poetic term, not the literal term. And so it seems that there seems to be an ambiguity, and I kind of mentioned this in my paper, where like this term can either be used for literal eunuchs or like just emasculated politicians that are like useless, basically. When you read, Colin McGallashan's article, "The New Eunuchracy," is a criticism of Tony Benn's book, The New Politics, and this is kind of related to the siege economy. We can kind of transfer into the siege economy from here. There's plenty more in the article for you to read if you want. I go through a lot of stuff, but Colin McGallashan uses the term eunuchrat to describe Tony Benn's criticisms of the Labour Party, in the sense that, like, listen, Tony Benn, you can't propose to change your party from a bunch of eunuchs to mighty men. You can't put the dick back on, right? You already emasculate yourselves in your parties. You kind of need like fresh blood. One of my favorite terms that Colin McGallashan uses is, "You need fuckable candidates." I love that term.
As true today as what it was said.
Yeah, like it's Colin McGallashan, his article, "The New Eunuchracy," which is like a kind of play on words for Tony Benn's The New Politics. It opens with this. Have you ever read Curtis Yarvin?
Yeah.
So this is 1970s, but it almost reads like you might remember the self-licking ice cream cone.
Yeah.
So like what Colin McGallashan says is in his one of his opening paragraphs, "Like women's lib, black power, self-opening coca cans, and vaginal deodorants, and soon, presumably, the woman-only cigarette that tells its emancipated consumer, 'You've come a long way, baby.' Participatory democracy and the power of the people have crossed the Atlantic and are here to stay." It's kind of like this criticism of American imperialism. But I read that as like, shit, man, someone could totally make some money on a feminist cigarette if they wanted to. Uh, but Tony, so like Tony Benn's big criticism. I'm kind of butchering this, but Tony Benn's big criticism of why he wrote the New Politics is that one of the reasons is that Tony Benn was aware America's imperial desires in Europe would inevitably turn Britain into a colony of the American Empire, and he didn't want that. And Colin McGladstein's main criticism of Tony Benn's desires for a independent socialist Britain was basically, you are the middlemen of the American Empire. You can't be your own empire because by definition you're the eunuchs of the American Empire. How are you going to create a new Britain when you're literally just like coughing up American talking points and like products and like trying to integrate with the American global economy? Like, you are the corners of their empire. You can't make a new Britain. You can't make an independent Britain. It's ridiculous. Tony Benn was like advocating in 1971 when he wrote this book that you have to really like the Labor Party has to try to create an independent economy in this post-World War II world where the Americans are absolutely dominating, and if we don't figure out a way to make our own niche in this new like global hierarchy, we're just going to be a colony. And Colin McGonagall's response was that you literally are the colonial managers. How are you going to create your own empire? Anyway, I'll pause there if you have any thoughts, because I'm trying to find a thing.
Yeah, I was curious about. So I don't think there'd be a lot of people who would argue against that at all. And I was curious, how could one find their way out of a eunuchracy if these individuals do end up like we could all agree that it's impossible to achieve any sort of national sovereignty with these people at the helm. A, how do they get there? B, is there a way to cycle them out from within?
That's what Tony Benn tried to do. Tony Benn, before there was New Labour, there was Bennism. And Bennism was the attempt to take over the Labour Party, cycle out the colonial administrators, and bring in like a British national, not quite nationalist because he was a socialist, but a nationally minded socialism, if you will. Like Tony Benn he's not a fascist. He's a socialist. He's a good old jolly socialist. But he was constrained in the language, because whenever he tried to describe what he wanted, it inevitably sounded like 1930s Germany. And he just
honestly, that's the funny thing. Like, no one wants to be a Nazi. I get that. But then when people start making the bullet lists of what they want, or how a system to course correct something, and they have to describe it, I'm like, well, it's a nationalist version of socialism. I'm like, okay, like, we all know, find a new name if you want, but it sounds like a lot of people kind of arrive at the same kind of construct,
And that's the problem. Like, this is why I advocate for an entirely new set of language, because the languages of the 20th century, whatever you might think about it, they've imprisoned themselves, and you just can't use it. It's on a rail. The second you pick a rail, the end point is already determined for you. They're entirely like locked in political movements that just have predetermined endpoints, and you're not going to escape that. In order to escape that, you need to get out of the boomer truth regime and figure out a new political scheme.
Yeah, and I don't want to distract you or anything, but in my work in marketing, this is something I harp on quite often, and I spoke of this with Pete Kionis just the other day, but I speak about it with a lot of other people, which is like, and I'm not the first one to say like we must break free of the 20th century, but I'm like, but really though, any gestures towards an old ideology that might have some truck for traditionalists like myself, but I'm like, you have to understand that for regular people, if they are convinced we are facing new problems, you need new solutions, even if they are old solutions with new branding. But that's why when people like to keep referring to the past, there is some sort of hyper real safety that we can create in there. But honestly, like, if you want to energize people, that you're going to need something novel.
Yeah, I often point to a question I ask people that are thinking about this is, can you tell me when Augustus's coronation ceremony to emperor happened?
If you're asking me, the answer is no. I don't know.
It never happened. He was
Okay.
never officially he was never officially declared emperor. What he did was run independently for elected office for like dozens of top official positions. Because in Rome you could hold multiple offices. And so what Augustus did was screwed. I'm just going to run for them all, and he won them all. and and Augustus was never declared emperor. He just won all the top positions in the election, and then he said, "I'm using my newfound powers to unify these various offices into the position of imperator." What is an imperator? Fuck if I know. It's not a king though. Don't call it a king.
Yeah, it's
So
a
like,
new thing, and the
yeah,
history is written by the people who find novel solutions for those
yeah.
problems, like realizing that,
And,
oh, there aren't rules. I can make new rules, and yeah, sorry, continue.
no, yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I've taken an interest in Benism, because Ben was really trying to like find terms and languages and ideas uh, that could exist independently of the 20th century and maybe guide Britain into a new world. And at one point he says, I think this is a quote by him. He didn't. The siege economy is the slang term within the cabinet. Officially, it was called the alternative economic strategy. uh, he says the premise of the so-called alternative economic strategy was that in a globalized world, Britain could only reboot its stalled economy by temporarily cutting itself off from external pressure. Under this strategy, the government would introduce the stringentest of controls on foreign imports and the flow of capital, effectively throwing up a protectionist barrier to stop too many foreign goods getting in. Behind this trade wall, they they could adopt a properly socialist policy with full employment, steadily rising wages, booming demand, and hence a resurgent manufacturing base, all under the direction of a souped up national enterprise board. These are creative terms. What is a national enterprise board? It's an imperial court. All right. What is he using socialism as? Imperial policy. What is he describing as an alternative economic strategy? It's an imperial jurisdiction. He's reinterpreting these terms into a socialist like framework, but he's kind of subverting socialism by doing it.
Mhm.
Like if Tony Benn had gotten his way and Britain was ruled by a national enterprise board with a president, you have a dictator. You have a national socialist dictator. He's just not using the terms. And it wouldn't be Hitler. It would be literally like old school Marxism. He'd be closer to Stalin than Adolf.
In your
Um,
opinion, would that be is that the good ending? Would that have been
it's
beneficial?
it's better. It's not good. It's like well, congratulations. You're not an American economy. You're just dirt fucking poor and can't control yourself. So I mean,
Well, because
congratulations.
a lot of people, when they speak of these political systems, oftentimes they're imperfect or they're kind of low
Yeah, yeah,
resolution. But if you view them as transitory, they make a lot more sense. Like, okay, maybe this is a transition system to another system. Whereas a lot of guys in
yeah.
our scene are like, oh, we're going to find this system that's going to work forever. And that just seems like an
So yeah,
impossibility.
yeah. No, like any attempt at a strategy is merely a bridge to something that isn't the suicide of your country. The current trajectory is suicide, and staying on the bridge is not a viable solution either. You have to march towards something that will actually work. Personally, I kind of am favorable to a Holy Roman Empire model where you kind of like devolve your government into a decentralized entity. I really don't see how centralized anything can survive this travesty of cultural suicide. I think you actually have to like divide up your empire into little pieces that can like figure out unique solutions to themselves, and then as the solutions work, you slowly grow their application to larger chunks of the country.
And that
uh
was even when Napoleon was kind of crafting his French Imperium. What
yeah,
many
yeah,
might call a liberal Imperium. Like that's essentially what he's working for. You would still have a center, but for all intents and purposes, he let everything else operate as was, which is a more stable. It's less of an iron grip. It's less.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
something that's too firm cannot be fluid and evolve.
When I was in Belgium, one of the things I learned about was the history of the Dutch under Napoleonic rule, and there was this problem in that people took a little bit it took a generation for the Dutch to realize this, but they realized that they were viewing the French culture as elite and their own culture as like mid tier, and eventually they kind of caught on that they had become a colony and that this was a it wasn't by accident. It was actually a French colonial tactic to make them all French. And so the Dutch kind of had this thought, well, yeah, why do we view high class as French? Why can't there be a Dutch high class? This is kind of the problem that America has right now. That there really isn't such a thing as a American high class. You have to be progressive to be high class. You have to be like a globalist to be high class. That those are high class things. They're like kind of one of our mutual friends calls it deracinated American dipshit. But
Who is that who's coined that term?
I just talked to him yesterday. I'll have to find out.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, I didn't know if you were trying to be like keep like a friend of ours. Wink, wink.
Outreamer, you might know him.
Yeah.
He's in.
So the good part maybe on Telegram side, we all know the same 30 guys.
Yeah, and they're 20 different versions of their names.
Yeah.
So the Dutch. I mean, there's a wonderful word that the Dutch invented that has gone extinct that we should really resurrect. Are you familiar with like the Marxist term bourgeois?
Yeah.
Bourgeois. So the French had a term called manageois, and this was essentially the managerial equivalent of the bourgeois. And they called the French administrators the manageois, the manageois class. And this was like a kind of mocking term, like you're not a governor because you're not Dutch. You're just a manager. You're just from France managing us. You're not really anybody. And eventually there was this cultural effort among the Dutch to develop an actual Dutch aristocracy to compete with the French aristocracy. And that's why Belgium has it's like two countries in one. There's the French side and the Dutch side. But this was a realization amongst the Dutch that they had forgotten what it meant to be a Dutch aristocrat, and they had associated the idea of an aristocrat with French. And as a result, they actually had no pathway for understanding their own people as an aristocratic class. They had traded that, like in order to become an aristocrat, you had to become French. There was just no such thing as a Dutch aristocrat, and so they put a generational effort into defining a Dutch aristocracy, and as a result, the Dutch reinvented themselves and became a proper culture with their own future. This shift from associating higher class with an out group, that's what Americans have to do. They have to stop associating high class with an out group. You can be a high class Anglo. You can be a high class French. You can be a high class African American if you want.
Would that have been traditionally like the WASP archetype, or is that just
America destroyed it was the Southern aristocracy that was destroyed in the Civil War. They were genocided. They were destroyed. I'm reading a book about David Ramsey. He was the Secretary of General what was it? Who's the guy in the U.S. government who handles law and like jurisdictions?
I'm not sure. I'm a Canadian.
Anyway, his name's David Ramsey. He was in the LBJ administration. Like, he was like high up prosecutor, attorney general. That was the word I was looking for. He's the attorney general under LBJ.
I was about to say attorney general.
Yeah, he was he was like a chip off the Dixiecrat shoulder. And when all the Martin Luther King protests and riots happened, his solution for dealing with them was to actually act like their owner, like their master. And by playing the cultural cards associated with being a benevolent master, he got the African Americans to obey them and stop rioting because he was playing the part. He didn't curse them out. He didn't insult them. He said, I'm your patriarch. Do what I say, and I'll bless you and benefit you. And that actually started the Democrat tradition of benefit, giving gifts to the African Americans for voting for them. People get jealous of that and angry about that. No, that's just basic That's just patronization. That's how politics work. At some point in time, the right wing viewed that as bad. I'm sorry, but the Democrat plantation is a good thing. It's how politics work. It's how you get power. You just don't have a plantation that you belong to because you suicided it. There's no such thing as it. But if you really look at the deeper history, this is a long-standing problem with American Southern culture. And to a lesser extent, this extends into the Yankeedom. There's this problem where the white slave owners viewed their black slaves as more valuable than the poor white people around them. That like it was more important to them to keep their property than it was to help their countrymen.
And this is
Uh,
something we discussed for people who are interested a bit more in this. When Christopher Sandbach was on the show, we spent some time discussing slavery era South, and this was one of the dynamics we covered. But sorry, continue. I find
yeah,
this interesting.
in many ways, after the Yankees destroyed the Southern aristocracy, that social model was actually kind of adopted by the Yankees at a national level. They like stole it from the South, and instead of blacks, they did it to Irishmen and Italians. But the problem is like the Yankees got into this. I'm a Yankees. We got into this problem of you basically take out a contract on a people group for about 30 to 40 years of loyalty that burns out, and you need a new people group to do the loyalty to. Uh, and this is I come from a Democrat family, and this is a problem with the Democrats. They can get the loyalty of a people group for a generation, and then they need to bring in a new people group because they burn through their trust, right? They haven't burned through the trust of the African American groups yet. They always seem to like almost like an echo of understanding that your property is more important than your countrymen. They always stop when they do this to African Americans because they don't want to lose the trust of them. But Irish, Italian, Poles, Mexicans, they'll burn through the trust and not give a shit. They'll just replace them. And this is an interesting political dynamic because essentially the Union side of that aristocracy became the ruling elite, and the rebellious side of that aristocracy were completely annihilated. And that's why the South has never really recovered from the Civil War because they were just annihilated.
Which is interesting because when people speak of an American identity, I'm just going to kind of translate this for some people who might kind of begin lost in the weeds of history here. One thing I find interesting is when people try and define an identity, let's say define the identity of the South, they start from the bottom and try to go to the top. They say, who are we as a people? Whereas this model, I think, is more effective. We saw this when we talked about a previous episode. We're talking about Ukrainian nationalism,
Yeah,
and how Ukrainian nationalism was, like most nationalism, crafted by an intelligentsia within the nation. It wasn't generated from the peasant class. And so
exactly.
perhaps the antidote to this runaway Eunuchracy, as we call it, might have to be that discovery or forging of some new aristocracy. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, and actually that goes back to the Chinese model where like the reason why the imperial cycle could cycle through is because there was a competing aristocracy to replace the imperial dynasty. We don't have an aristocracy to replace our imperial dynasties. We've had the Kennedys, the Bushes, the Clintons, and the Bidens for almost a century now. They just haven't gone away. Uh, and that is a unhealthy model because we just keep getting more and more discentric versions of the same noble families.
You know, it's funny, and we're going to talk about this on the show, probably the next episode. But do you watch this show Succession?
No, I don't, but I've heard about it. It sounds like it's might related to it.
I think you might get a kick of it because there's a lot going on in the show. It follows this. It's sort of a chimera of different American media dynasties. So there's the what's the fucking family? There's the Murdochs that are in there, but then there's they start with the red something red. You know what I mean? They're like another conservative media dynasty. I'm going to forget their names, but there's a few of them in there, and there's things that are pulled from the news headlines that make it in there. But one of the running themes is that the presidency doesn't really matter, and that it follows this media family who owns. In this, they own
Yeah,
a channel called ATN, which is basically Fox News, and then there's these scenes where they're at a Republican think tank, essentially deciding who the next president's going to be, and they have the candidates there, and then they're saying, "Oh, who do we like?" Right? And so, but the whole idea is that the
yeah.
presidency is kind of a joke. It's these families, and there's a few of them who are really the movers and shakers and the real power centers.
I mean, America is at that level imperial. At the same time, it's not quite imperial. It's more. It really operates more like a Venetian republic than a proper monarchy. But Yeah, I mean, like, my family has close ties to the Clinton family, fun fact, but, uh, and so in 2016, when the Clinton family lost the heir of the Democratic Party, my family lost all their political power. So so we all my cousins and uncles had
I'm getting in trouble with our audience. We just got our first interview with a woman last week, and now I got a Jewish Clintonite, and I'm just having a ball. But
yeah, so my family had not me directly, but like various uncles and cousins had to reorganize around the new family that took over the party. Because the reason why Biden is currently in power is because he was the next up. Like the Clinton family lost power in 2016. The Biden family saw that vacuum and just flushed right in. But the Biden family is a eunuch family because, again, Hunter Biden ain't exactly uh he ain't exactly having kids anytime soon.
do you see a lot of these sort of political American dynasties as eunuchish dynasties, like the Clintons?
Yeah.
Do they have the stuff?
So the Clinton has a daughter who has connections and will probably produce an heir one day. So there's always a possibility the Clinton family comes back. The Biden family is kind of ripping itself apart and this is like it is a eunuch family in the sense that Hunter's probably maybe he has a bastard somewhere, who knows, but Hunter Biden's someone who I could totally if I were a campaign manager, I could recover that. He's got the physique, he's got the money, he's got the connections. He just has a really, really, really fucked up closet full of skeletons.
Yeah.
It could be recovered. He'd have to go through a redemption arc, but you could totally recover that.
Well, this my policy with this is that if you have 2 skeletons in your closet, it's a problem. If you have 35 skeletons, you're just a cool skeleton guy.
That's a good way to put it. But because the Clinton family lost power and the Biden family is eunuchratic, you kind of see these vying lower party family members trying to get in. Like the Newsons in California are trying to get in. There's another Democrat party I'm trying to think. Family guy. Well, the Kennedys are trying to get their guy back in, but a Bell's palsy guy with a feminine voice ain't exactly quality material. So the Democrat Party has this problem where a lot of them are just dysgenic rather. They've burned through their quality people, and all that's left of these Habsburg chin equivalents, right? Like
I was about to use the Habsburg as an example. Yeah.
There's toothless Hunter Biden and callboy Pelosi family and murderous Clinton families. And it's not exactly as if their children have the capacity to be as brutal as the parents. Hillary Clinton's a bitch, a cold-hearted bitch who's murdered people. I don't think her daughter could do that. I don't think she's got it in her.
Well, I think you're describing something a lot of people feel, which is they look at these individuals and they say, well, you're not hyper competent, but you don't give off a nobility. So you're just these like the Newsoms and stuff. I see your status, but every angle I look at it from, it doesn't seem to make sense why you're up there.
Newsom has potential to be an incoming family. He's got kids. He's got the physique. He's not dysgenic. He's got the quality to be a president and found a dynasty. The question is if he's got the connections and networks to, can he buy out the Biden supporters to come over to his side, right?
I'm curious about what your thought about Trump was. I know you're probably tired of talking about Trump, but I was figuring out where he might fit in with this.
You got a never Trumper here. So.
Well, that's it, because he didn't seem like everyone liked him because it wasn't from that world, but he still had status. But he,
are you familiar with Isaac Asimov's works?
Yeah.
You know The Mule, right?
No, I've only read the first couple Foundation books, I think, actually.
The Mule is an interesting character. When you get up to him, you'll understand why Trump is a mule. Trump is potentially... I would say his family managed to get in. They're kind of like this part of this family that they don't have to stay Republican, right? And they were Democrat like a decade ago, right? They're an example of a family that would have been a new noble line in the Democratic Party, but these stuffy eunuchs didn't let them get in, so they went to the secondary party. And they're trying to, the strategy was to try to like make the Republican Party the new primary party. Fat chance, haha, funny joke. And now, you had the potential where the Trump family, it's not going away. You have several heirs who have wealth and independently wealthy, and the estates and wealth of that family is not going to go away when Trump dies. You'll have several generations of Trump in the future, for sure. I could totally see one of Trump's sons being a president in like 30 years from now. That is a new family that has pushed into the Republican Party, and the Republicans Party, they're kind of like a revolving door in terms of noble families. Like no one in there lasts more than a single presidential term, really. The Bush family has already become. It's one of those weird situations where there isn't really a higher noble family in that party. Trump just kind of filled the vacuum, and he's probably gonna, his family. I mean, let me be frank. His family could very well take over the party and be the leading premier for a generation. That could happen. It depends. I'm not. I haven't thought my thoughts too much on it too much, but the Republican. I don't think the Republican Party has an alternative noble family to run it. Like who else is there really?
Yeah,
Pompeo.
it got me thinking.
Yep.
Because I'm wondering, and this might be too big of a question. You can tell me to go fuck myself, but I'm wondering, to cycle out the eunuchs, as it were, and bring in this sort of new dynastic family. Would this family need to, in a sense, come prepared with a new American identity? Because that's also kind of what we're talking about introducing that intelligentsia level stuff. Like, if the Trump family wanted to really stake a claim, would they need to come correct with that level of like identity or nation building?
Probably, and that's a bit of a tragedy because there simply aren't enough. Maybe it's not a tragedy. I was gonna say maybe it's a tragedy because there aren't enough Anglos in the country to make it an identity, but that may not necessarily be bad because if the Anglos were to create a new identity, it would probably become a standard reproducible identity and help them recover. Yeah, because the Anglos really haven't had an identity since like the early 1900s. It just got wiped out. Like the last Anglo president was probably uh, who's the WW guy in World War One? William. I can't never pronounce his name right. No. The president during World War One.
As other people know, I'm going to sound like a retard this episode because I don't really have a lot of American history.
I keep forgetting your Civil War.
Yeah.
World War One president. Woodrow Wilson. That's the guy. Woodrow Wilson was probably the last proper Anglo president, like with all the aristocratic qualities. There have been plenty of Anglo presidents since, but they've all been like of a dysgenic quality. Clinton was an old Anglo boy. The Clinton family goes back to the Revolutionary War, but he was a womanizer, drunk, drinking with. He drank with he got drunk with the premier of the Soviet Union, right? So it's like, what the fuck is this? Like the two great nuclear powers, their leaders are drunk together. Just don't keep them away from the red button. But they were like mid tier. They weren't high quality. They weren't low quality. They were in the process of decline. And now you get like the Habsburg Clinton child and the Habsburg Pelosi child and the Habsburg Biden child, and they're just declining quality of people. Where was I going with this? I totally forgot. I forgot where I was going with this. Actually, I lost train of my thought.
Oh, it's good. It's very, very late, and I know you might probably have to get going soon.
No, I have another hour, but I know you don't want to go for another hour.
Because I do have to get going. I got a baby crying upstairs. But also, I wanted to tell one story that I found interesting recently when we were covering the history of the Mongols, and this might relate to the Chinese example you gave. Because we're not huge fans of the Chinese government right now, but I do find ancient China a very historically unique case. But the story of the Mongols was very funny when we covered it, because that was almost a traditional empire conquering a bureaucracy that was eventually subsumed by the bureaucracy, because the Chinese bureaucracy, the Chinese state, was this ancient, impenetrable thing. And so
Deep
you
state.
had the Mongols taking, well, it's different dynasties, obviously, but it was something that functioned like a state. It was this very complex organism that, even though you had the Mongols coming in with the fucking swords, and it's like, I'm in charge and you pay me now, and it had the brashness of a conquering empire, but it still couldn't untangle this bureaucracy. And so over time, you saw the Mongols that were in charge of it just become Chinese. And so it was, I just found it interesting. It was this traditional
Yeah,
conquering
yeah.
empire that went up against this indecipherable bureaucracy and lost by degrees over time.
Yeah, and China has like something in the range of like 6 to 8,000 years of history. Europe has something in the range of like 3,000 years of history. America has 300 years. It's still, well, 400 years. It's still not clear if our continental legacy will end up more like China or more like Rome, right? It's not clear. We're too young to understand where that goes. Um, and in many ways, uh, you know, it, I'm writing a Substack article right now about the relationship between the the aristocracy of different parts of the Roman Empire and how they related to each other. Fun
Hmm.
fact: the Latin aristocracy in Rome and the Gallic aristocracy in Paris during the Roman Empire, they went. A large amount of the fall of the Roman Empire relates to the divorce between those aristocrats. There's a century-long declining relationship. Had that decline, had that divorce never happened, the Roman Empire would have endured another 1,000 years or longer in Europe. That the binding cells of European dominance comes with the relationship between those two aristocratic courts, the Gauls and the Latins, to a lesser extent the Germans too, but the Germans have always been in a reflection of either the French or the Italians. They are the strongest, but they are not the. They want to be the head, but oftentimes they're just the arms of whatever is the head. Um. So anyway.
I'd be interested in reading that, because
Yeah.
arc that I would like to go on eventually, and in our scene, everyone talks about
Yeah.
elites, the cabals, or whatnot, but it's spoken very vaguely and kind of low resolution quality. And I wanted to do, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term, elite studies, and see, because it was presented to me, the question of, everyone goes on about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, and someone said, well, what's so bad about that? And it kind of gave me pause, because no one had ever really fucking asked that before. So I had to kind of unpack about, here's how, like, why might make an argument for why this is bad, and then actually doing that. But that it requires you to actually get into, how do NGOs work? How do globalist elites work? How do they get there? What do they want? What are they? And that entire strata, I don't think is spoken of in detail a lot, especially in our scene. And if you don't understand it, then you can't really do anything about it, right?
Yeah, I hopefully have explained here how the American elite theory works at a family level. I was talking to my uncle who he's in an alphabet organization. I'll say that. And I was talking with him, and I put because he was talking about how he was sad Pompeo isn't running for president, and he's not convinced that DeSantis would be a good president. He probably makes a better governor. He's my most conservative uncle, and so he's like, my family's in bed with the Democrats. He's like the, gee, I really wish a cool Republican would come by kind of guy. And,
Yeah.
and I put the question to him, Uncle, what do you think about this? Pompeo and DeSantis as a ticket together. And he paused for a second. He thought that would be a powerful dynamic.
Hmm.
He didn't know which one would be president, which would be vice president, but that would be a competent dynamic. The union of those families would be competent enough to run the country competently. To repeat myself, but unfortunately, that it doesn't look like it's going to happen. But maybe next time. I wanted to quickly. We never actually got into what the siege economy was, I want to just quickly reflect on that before we
Of course,
leave.
yes.
So just to kind of pivot back to that concept, Tony Benn wrote the article that I was describing, The New Politics, in 1970 or 1971. Later on, when he was a member of the Labour Party, this is before Thatcher. He was a member of the Labour Party cabinet, running the country before Thatcher, and they were really in a shitter. They had inflation about 4 times what it is now under COVID limits. So it was anybody who lived through the 1970s Britain can tell you how bad it was. It was like a crapshoot. And so they kind of assembled the parliament, and they got an honest. They talked honestly about the problem that Britain was essentially economically dying, and there were many proposals proposed. The most controversial one was take out a loan with the IMF and just accept colonial status to the Americans. Just accept it. We lost the empire. Just be a colony. It's the only thing we can do. And Tony Benn was like, I have this alternative economic model. I really think we should give it a shot, even if it fucks us over. We're going to lose the election either way. We might as well try. And his proposal, the alternative economic model, whatever it was, he called it the siege economy. And what he said was basically like, we have to operate on the assumption that doing this will make us the enemy of the world. We have to operate on the assumption we're going to be under siege by the world, especially the Americans. His famous quote was, if you take out a loan with the IMF and become an American colony, you'll be in the citadel with the bankers. And outside the citadel will be the angry people and the unions betrayed, and they'll be storming your citadel forever. You go with my model, you're still in the citadel, but you're with the trade unions and the people, and it's the bankers outside storming you. Which do you want to be? Which do you want to be? You want to be in the citadel with the bankers, or you want to be in the citadel with the people, right? Like, which do you want to be when the going gets tough? And the Labour government chickened out and went with the colonial status. But he said constantly, like, like for anybody in the future who wants to actually be independent of this problem, you have to take the siege economy method. You have to operate on the assumption that the world's elite are going to come down your throat, and unless you are already operating on the assumption that you have to stand alone as if you're under siege, you're not going to make it. And so his proposal for a siege economy, which the news has been using this economy for Russia, actually. Fun fact, Russia has seemingly been adopting Tony Benn's siege economic model for how they would endure it. And Russia did follow his advice. They planned it out. Starting in like 2012 or so, they started planning the siege economy. And between like 2012 to 2020, they planned that out. And as a result, when the world did come down on them, they're not doing great. They seem to be probably stagnant or losing the Ukraine war, but they're not collapsing. They're not dying. Russia can survive that L. They probably couldn't survive that L if they were still integrated into the global economy. They probably would be fucked right now. So understand the scale of time and dedication it takes to build a siege economy. Like if you're like an American living in rural bumblefuck nowhere, anything you want to do is going to take until your children are grown up, right? Like you can't just walk out one day and say, I want to overthrow the NATO empire. Tough shit. You can't. You got to plan it out. You're going to come under siege, and unless you have the means of providing for your people as an aristocrat, you're just going to be in the chopping block. Don't be a retard. That's just the reality of it. So I would say Tony Benn's siege economic model, it is, let's say this much, it's well enough written that it's keeping Russia alive. There you go. That's the way to put it. The siege economic model is sufficient to keep Russia from collapsing for now. It may not last, but for now. I'm part Ukraine. The Jewish side, Ukrainian Jew. I'm like literally everything that the right wing hates. But
no, I'm half Ukrainian as well, and so everyone's like, just all Ukrainians should die. I'm like, okay.
I mean, they speak. My ancestors spoke. My ancestors didn't speak Russian or Ukrainian. They spoke Rossaic, which is a bastardized combination of both. But anyway, like they were Russian basically. But so understand, I'm speaking from someone who's probably not on the side of Russia. I can commend Russia for taking the long game, which appears to be staving off collapse. Longer game, maybe it doesn't work, but for now, they're not collapsing. They're stagnant. They're experiencing everything Tony Benn said. You would be poorer, you would have a lower standard, you would find life difficult, but you will not be a colony and you will not collapse. You are simply having hardship. And that's the tactic of the siege economy is accepting a lower standard in exchange for sovereignty that you gradually, slowly, over generations compensate for with domestic investment and efforts. I'll say this much: Tony Benn, he was against joining the EU. Part of his siege economy was leaving the EU, which is kind of ironic. He was against a lot of the mismanaged immigration stuff. Again, this guy is a socialist, so don't act like he's your guy. He was a leftist through and through. I mean, I'm kind of leftist, so I'm not anybody's guy on the side. But
honestly, that's a trend I see more and more on the dissident right these days. More friendly gestures towards that sort of thing.
Because the left right dichotomy is dead. It doesn't mean anything anymore. Like when the quote unquote left wing is chopping off kids' dicks, I'll be a right winger. Okay, I don't care. Like I'll worry about workers' rights like after we stop chopping off kids' dicks. How about that?
Yeah, exactly. No,
it's
more,
like
the circles that we run in, like there's more. I would say, and this might sound like a dig, but I find there's more right wingers that have a working understanding of what we might call leftist concepts and anarchist concepts, frankly, than a lot of leftists do. And that, like, arguably, a lot of that NRX Curtis Yarvin, like, if you really read into Marxist theory, you'll find a lot of like leftist Marxist stuff in Yarvin's writing. There's a lot of like new left guys that are kind of smuggling some old ideas. I'm not allergic to that. On our show, we've covered a great number of kind of kooky leftist stuff too, like George Bataille and the Accursed Sharon stuff. But we're not scared of that shit.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm pro-life, and that's just about the only right-wing position I'm of. I'm pretty much just a pro-life leftist for the most part. Like I want workers' rights, I want unions, I want like things that work, and I want babies not to be killed. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Well, and also if you're not locked into a lot of these isms, especially these evolving isms, then you can kind of explore some of these good ideas from people you might not have expected.
I'm of the belief that, I mean, again, like the right-left dichotomy is primarily a import from the French Revolution, and as that era's dynamics collapse in the weird situation we're in, there's gonna be new dynamics. Like you might not have seen it, but I drew this Imperial American Eagle last week or two. Did you see that?
I heard people talking about it. Actually, I never saw it though.
I'll send it to you, but it's basically like I made the Eagle's left side Celtic flags and right side Germanic flags, and I made the argument, like the politics of American future should be Germanic versus Celtic views rather than left wing, right wing views, right? Like re-tribalize and
I like
identify
that.
yourself.
That's cool.
I'll say.
Yeah.
Like it would be because it grounds your politics into the traditions of a people group. It means that like when you are something, you're calling to a lineage. It's not this like abstract French nonsense that comes out of thin air and can be manipulated however you want. Like if the left wing decides tomorrow that suddenly being pro-life is a left wing talking point, the entire left wing will obey it, right? If it were associated with a specific tribe, that would be a lot harder to pull off.
Yeah, I've told people, like, coming down the pike, within the next couple of years, you are going to see a lot of the left adopt an anti-trans position. And I don't think the right is prepared for that. I think the anti-trans issue kind of fell in our lap, and we're frothing at the mouth over it. But there's no reason that a shit lib can't say that we're against this trans madness, and we've always been against it. The right typically will not be prepared for that, rhetorical pivot, and will just be left holding a bag of shit. Well, they claim that it's no, they were actually the ones who are all for it.
I sent you the Eagle if you want to make a comment on it, but I don't know if you can show visuals on it, but on the stream, I'm on the audio end, so I don't know if you can even show it, but
I'll find a
I
way to
sent you my
post it.
Telegram.
I like that. Anyway, I do need to get go. Oh, this is really cool. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
yeah. Sorry,
get a
sorry.
no. I like this image. I'm gonna start posting on the channel. This is cool, but we do have to get going, and I want to make sure people correctly, if they like the ideas they've heard here, if they like anything of the concepts, be sure to check out luthnite.substack.com, and when you inevitably change it, we will update people with that.
Yeah.
But you are there are other interviews I've seen you on. Sometimes you go by Cringewalker, sometimes with a C, sometimes with a
Yeah.
K. Where can people find you on Telegram?
I have a art channel called I think it's just the TME, whatever the hell format they have for their links. It's restorationist. Uh I just do propaganda posters for like a new regime that isn't as cringe as this one. I'm eventually gonna make a Telegram for these kind of like American Empire themed images that aren't propaganda, but just like aesthetic posting. I do have a Twitter a Twitter
Oh, is
account.
this
One
the
of my old
Restorationist Bureau?
yeah, I
Oh
run that.
shit, you make those? Those are amazing. I didn't know that was you.
Yeah, yeah, that's me.
Holy shit, these
Uh,
are like my favorite things I've been seeing.
yeah. It was the truth is that art can help centralize concepts between divergent causes. I'm sometimes anti-pagan, but I do try to make the art broad church to allow different sections of the right wing to kind of centralize around common themes. There's a quote one of my friends says: "The left wing has common policy, the right wing has common instinct," and I think that's something to really
Yeah,
think
I
about.
just want people to know, just from
Uh,
even from an ad man. I'm just going to say, like, we're a scene that likes to ape propaganda and ape themes and stuff, but like this to me is it's just like Stone Toss level. Where when people would say Stone Toss, I'm like, Stone Toss is not only a great right wing